Hey everyone, welcome to this post. So this is if you're coming in through my blog, awesome, thank you. If you're coming in from Ball State to watch a guest lecture, thank you as well. Thanks for being a part of the school, and I'm excited about that. Um, so my name is Mike Butler. I'm gonna go through a deck on lessons in data and analytics visualization. So this is a guest lecture that was requested by Dr. Rusko. And I'm really excited to do this. This is a passion of mine. I don't get to do it as much, so this is I think we'll have some fun. So today, what we're going to talk about are some principles of good analytics and visualization, just high level. We'll talk through lessons in visualization, and you can see some of those items there. We'll talk about Gestalt principles. I think they're pretty important when you're thinking about visualization. And then I've got some recommended reading for you, and we'll go through some of that. Before that, though, who am I? So again, my name is Mike Butler. Today, at the time of this recording, I'm a senior director of data delivery at One America Financial. So One America has all kinds of different services in life insurance and employee benefits and retirement services. Great company to work for out of Indianapolis. Fantastic place. What have I done in the past? So, what qualifies me? So I don't have it all on here, but I've been a CTO, I've been a CTIO, I've been an advising CDO for a consulting practice. I was the director of consulting delivery for a local firm. I've been a BSU adjunct professor. So I have had an opportunity to do a lot of different stuff throughout my career. I've also been the director of business intelligence. I was the VP of BI for a bank for a while. So I've done this for a while. And in a lot of those roles, I would say I was pretty hands-on. I still am pretty hands-on. I enjoy it. I still keep up with certifications, all that kind of stuff. I can still work in Power BI, Tableau, Excel pretty effectively if I need to. How am I connected to Ball State? So I'm a BSU alum. I have 2 degrees from Ball State. I sit on 2 different advisory boards. So one is the Business Analytics Advisory Board, and the other is the ISOM Advisory Board, connected into the Business College. I also do SOAR mentoring. I've been really excited to work with students. One of the most recent ones, Shelby Wright, from graduated last year. I had a lot of fun working with her throughout her tenure at school. If you want to connect with me, so on the right is my blog, so thedatahitchhiker.com. On the left is my LinkedIn page. You can just you can search me on there. That's where I'm the most likely to respond, on LinkedIn, more than email or anything else these days. So let's jump into it. Hopefully that qualifies me. So principles of good analytics and visualization. So I keep this high level. So this lecture is meant to help you with some ideas and solidify some things and keep you thinking about what you're doing. It's not meant to be all encompassing or anything like that. So just some things that I think about when I'm working on analytics and visualization work. And the first is that things have to have purpose. So if you're going to build a visual, if you're going to set up some analytics, or if you're going to write a report, even, we're not getting into that in this lecture, but you want to make sure that you're working towards something, that what you've done should explain something, that has some kind of purpose, that means something to someone. I've seen bad examples of correlation. Someone did a correlation between the year and the amount of corn sales against how many wars were going on at the time, and things like that. That doesn't really have a purpose. It's funny if you find a correlation, but one, that doesn't mean causation, and two, it doesn't serve anything other than it's funny. It doesn't help. The second thing, and this is actually, I think, one of the most important things in analytics and visualization development, is you should be able to answer a question. That means question formation. Some people would sometimes call it requirements, but question formation becomes one of the most important things that you'll do when you're developing a visualization. So if you have a visual, what I would challenge you to do, and sometimes I do this, is I write the title of the visual as a question. And what am I trying to answer? It's also a great exercise if you're trying to produce a PowerPoint presentation and you're trying to make sure you answer the questions that you would have around something. Same thing with visualization. You can use that same technique to adapt. Third, it has to tell a story to its audience, and audience is the key word in that. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, there's a flow, that we go from, an intro, we tell the story, and it closes. The best analytics and visualizations have that continuity to it, and they have that ability for people to look at it and understand the story of what's happening. I saw some really great visualizations done by a data scientist I used to work with around daycare deserts in Indiana, and she had done some fantastic work that really, I mean, within seconds, you understood what her visualizations were telling you, and you could see the problems before she even presented them in her lecture. So that's what you're after, is that story is there, and people can get to understand the plot, to understand the problems before you have to tell them about it. I think the idea is that if you have to explain a joke, it's probably not funny. Same thing here. If you have to explain a visualization, it's probably not funny. I think I say that later in the lecture. And the last thing that I think about when I think about good analytics and visualization is just using the right visualization. It'd be surprising how often people pick a visualization that doesn't make any sense. So an example is you want to show a trend through time, and you pick a pie chart as a really simple one. And so you put a bunch of pie charts so people can see, what happened with, I don't know, revenue over a period of time. Well, that's really not a very good visualization. That's really hard to interpret. And I'll show you some examples of that here as we get through this. So keep those 4 in mind as you're working through things. So a few lessons, and we'll jump into the meat of this. And I'll be pretty quick. This isn't meant to be a long lecture, but so context and audience. So I find this to be, as well as when you're trying to answer questions, this is probably the most important thing you need to be thinking about when you're developing analytics and visualization. So who is your audience? Are you presenting to a class, a professor, client, an internal team, your family? I don't know, it doesn't matter. But who is your audience? You really do need to understand that, because a lot of times you will shape your approach based on who, what, and how. And I have those in here. So who, you really need to be specific about who your audience is. Like, who are you developing this for? And I've seen situations where you might develop the same data might be used for 2 different presentations because you really have 2 different audiences. In business, you would find that maybe the executive team wants very high level summary data. But if you're in the trenches dealing with operations or something like that, you want very detailed information so that you can hunt down problems and things like that. Those can be different types of analytics and different types of ways we might visualize that using the same data. So you have to know your audience. You have to know who. The next thing you have to know is what. So you're choosing the information and the action for the audience. So you're trying to, and my example before is, are you working with an executive team? Are you working with someone in operations? We want to make sure that we're focused on the what as well as the who. And then last, we want to make sure we're focused on how. So how are we going to deliver that information? What's that look like? And this is all about controlling the message. So when we think about who, what, and how in this context, is how do you control that message to get it to the audience? So I put an example down there. So who, so if we were developing an analytic or a dashboard, we'd say the CICS program leaders can approve classes for the summer. And we say the what? Well, programs taught by industry leaders have increased enrollment. So the how, we want to illustrate how using industry practitioners like myself in the summer helps with the growth of enrollment, right? And so now we can start to think through what would those visualizations and those analytics look like. So secondly, we have to keep it really succinct too. And I'll show you some examples of I'll show you an example of a bad dashboard here in a bit with some bad visualizations. There's 2 concepts you need to think about, I think, when you're trying to keep something succinct. So let's say you develop this visual, you should be able to do 2 things with it. And I have to give credit to the elevator pitch concept from my friend Jacqueline Jones that I used to work with for years. But So the elevator pitch concept is if you're in an elevator and someone asks you a question, so I've happened many times to me, and you have a high-level executive that asks you a question or something like that, and you only have maybe 20, 30 seconds to answer it, you should be able to answer what are you doing with your analytic and your visualization, or whatever their dashboard, whatever you're calling it. You should be able to answer that in 20, 30 seconds. What's the value of it is what you're trying to answer with an elevator pitch. You probably can't tell the story in an elevator pitch, and I wouldn't worry about that. You should be able to explain the value of what it does and why does it exist. So it's that answers the question. That's a comes from sales technique. It comes from preparing yourself. But the idea behind that is 20, 30 seconds, you can explain what your visualization and what your analytics for. The other thing that I encourage, and this is from a book, and I'll give you some recommendations for readings here in a minute, is the 3-minute story. So you assume you have only 3 minutes to really explain your visualization or your dashboard or your analytics. And if you only have 3 minutes, what would you get through? How would you tell that story? And so this is when I get into when you're telling stories, you want to, if you've developed really good visualizations, we should be able to tell that story very cleanly. But again, if you have to explain the punchline of a good joke, it's probably not a good joke. You shouldn't, same thing. You shouldn't have to explain visualizations in detail. You should be able to do it very succinctly. So either with elevator pitches or 3-minute stories. If it takes you 45 minutes to explain a single page dashboard, then you probably have way too much information on it, or your story's off, or there's something off with what you're trying to do. Third, selecting a visual. So this one is hard. I'm going to show you a decision tree here in a second that you could use, and it actually has a problem. I'm not going to tell you what the problem is. We'll see if you pick it up, and I tell you at the end. But so when you're selecting a visual, so there's a lot of options. Excel has a ton. I put them on the right there. Power BI and Tableau are borderline infinite because of what you can do and how you can bring in like R code and things like that, and actually set it in your dashboard. But so there's a lot of options. So usually you want to pick the simplest thing that tells the story. And I think people sometimes like to pick things because they look cool. But I can give you a few pieces of advice that are generally you're never going to do. You're generally not going to put a table of information in front of people in a presentation. You might in certain situations, but it's too complicated and you lose audiences really fast. So knowing the context of your audience, understanding then how do you keep this kind of simple and keep it succinct. If you're putting big tables of information that you have to scroll through, I think you've missed. Generally, I would also say avoid pie charts. I'd say 98% of people use them incorrectly. So if you're using them in your presentation, you should really think about it. Is it really telling the story, or do you think it just looks neat? Just looks neat, I would get it out of there. There's probably something maybe that tells the story better. Again, there's always exceptions to that rule, but keep that in mind. And last, almost never use 3D. We'll talk about this here in a second about how your brain works and the things that your brain can interpret. And size and shape are two of them. And when you use 3D, you introduce a concept, you introduce cognitive load, you introduce like a new dimension that your brain isn't trying to interpret. And usually 3D charts don't actually mean anything. We don't really need them, except when you actually are trying to use a third dimension. So if you have a plane, if you have an X and Y coordinate, and you are trying to add Z because it actually means something, and you feel like that visualization can actually be interpreted succinctly and it tells your story, then yeah, you might use it. But in general, it's not recommended. So let me show you. So I found this on Katie Nuggets when I was looking for something, and I have some similar things for when I'm picking data science algorithms, and how do we pick fraud analytics algorithms and things like that. But the idea behind this, and the link's in there. You can Google it. There's a bunch of these out there, but there is a problem with this one, and not a problem with the way they're making the decisions, but a problem with the way it's depicted, especially since this is a visualization concept. When We'll see if you catch it. So, so slow changes over time, comparing and contrasting categories, revealing trends in quantitative data sets, highlighting a single measure. So the idea behind this decision tree is you pick what you're trying to look at and what you're trying to depict, and you go through some, and it has questions. And so the green path is a yes, the red path is a no. So the right side is no, the left side is yes. So if you follow that, are you trying to depict a slow change over time? And are there multiple data sets? Well, you might say no. Then a line chart's a really good option. That's the one on the right that we're talking about. Or you might say yes, and then you have to ask yourself, do the data sets make up the whole? And you say, yeah, they do. So a stacked area chart might make the most sense when you're showing a trend like that. So you get the idea. You can use a tool like this. So you may have already developed your dashboards or an analytic, and now you're just trying to get some ideas and some checks. Well, that's a way to check that. So you can use this and say, if you're using a chart or something like that you're not sure, you can go through this and see if you've captured it, or if you think you're off and you need to make a change. Okay, so I'll do this quickly, but let's talk a little bit about what's going on in your head when you're processing visual information and what's going on with these analytics and these tools. So so this is from some of my research that I've done over the years into cognitive bias and what limits innovation and what causes challenges with data science and things like that. I got really interested in data collection, and if you're collecting biased data, how do you know that data is ever good? And this led me to this guy named Daniel Kahneman. And what he theorizes is that our brain really has two systems. So this is called dual processing theory. And I'm going to do a really high level version. If you want to read about it, you can. So your brain works in two ways. So it has system one and system two. So system one is autonomous. It's fast. If you're driving a car and you hit your brakes, it's that engine. It makes decisions very quickly for you. It's part of how we see. In all honesty, it's your quick kind of reactive decision-making ability and ability to interpret the environment. System two is the next kind of step in your brain when you have to focus. So it requires stimulation. When system two engages, they've actually measured this, and your pupils will slightly dilate. You're deeper in thought. It actually consumes more energy. And as humans, we try to conserve energy. So our brains tend to sit in system one. So when someone sees your dashboard, they are most likely, generally, you are getting a system one response. And that's really important to think about. So, and the reason for this is, visual perception is part of your visual cortex, your brain, which means fast processing, very quick. It's all system one stuff that's going on. System two can engage, but usually engaging system two requires effort. So people, and you're not cognitively, you're not sitting here engaging system one and system two as you need it, but system two, as you get deeper into thought and as you engage something, takes effort, and because it takes effort, it takes energy. Your default is system one. You're going to always use system one, and you're going to try not to use system two unless you need to. System one is also where biases start to exist. It's where your brain creates shortcuts to be able to use system one so it doesn't have to engage system two. Now, good storytelling can help someone engage system two so they really deeply engage in your analytics and in your dashboards. So keep that in mind. So the next thing, and part of what your visual cortex can do, and what I find interesting is when we're dealing with visualization, is shape, color, and motion are three things that your brain can track separately, which is really cool. Meaning, if you're developing good visualizations and analytics, you can use shape, you can use color, and you can use motion. It's rare, but I do see people do it to depict what the story that you're trying to tell. So shape, color, and motion because of your visual cortex, but it's happening very, very quickly. People are responding to it. So generally, when someone sees a dashboard or sees visualizations or sees analytics, you actually have a few seconds for them to understand enough of it and either immediately get it, or you have to have a story that's being told that's good enough, that's stimulating their system too, that's making them think, that's engaging them, and is making the effort worth it, I guess would be the way to think about it. So given that, so great. So your brain's super powerful, can do all this stuff, and can track all these things, and you could add shape and color and motion to a bunch of different stuff on a page, maybe 100 of them. That's a bad idea. Because there's another concept called cognitive load that we start to think about when we're dealing with visualization. And this comes from like UI UX problems, where there's a certain amount of mental effort we have to take to perform a task. So this is you're thinking system one, system two. We default to lower energy, lower effort. So you can't put too much in front of someone or it shuts them down. Because if you can overload someone where you're trying to get their brain to do too much, and you're not going to get system two at that point, you're going to get a fight or flight response for them to be like, I'm done. So what do I mean? So let's look at this. So if you take a look at this, so on the left is what I would consider very high cognitive load. This is a dashboard about, I think something going on in London, looks like, of the city. And so there's all kinds of stuff going on. So I can sit here and I can try to engage it, and I can, deeply look at it. But like my initial reaction, and yours might have been too, was you saw this and you were like, whoa, what is going on there? Where on the right is a lower cognitive load dashboard that I found online. And this is actually a pretty good one. It's very simple. It tells me it's a customer service dashboard. I can see trends. I can see some, high level metrics on the day. Pretty simple. But that's your idea, is you want to convey a message. So I can look at that dashboard and understand how that team's doing in terms of call volumes and responses. What's their best day when to call in, because it's their fastest, answer times. That's really cool. On the left, I have no idea what story it's trying. It's just all over the place. So higher cognitive loads are generally bad. So a lot of people will try to shove as much information as they can on a page. I've been guilty of this. That's sometimes not what you want. You want the smaller amount of information that tells your story, and create multiple dashboards or visualizations if that's what you need to do. All right, so we're going to hit these really quickly, and then I'm going to wrap up the lecture. So let's talk. So now you understand. So you've kind of got these lessons I've given you and some things you should be thinking about. And now we're going to talk through the Gestalt principle. So this comes from an area of psychology, and there's essentially 6 principles in which our brains do things but we can use those to make decisions on what we're going to do with our visualizations. And so I'm going to hit these. So I'm going to hit them real quick, and then actually, I've got a slide on each one. But so we've got proximity, similarity, enclosure, closure, continuity, and connection. All right. So those are the 6, and let's hit these. So this is where at this point we're going to use psychology to kind of determine how do we want to deal with visualizations. And so here's some concepts like this. So our brain likes to group objects, and it tends to do that. So your visual cortex is firing. But if you look at that, your brain is probably seeing rows and columns just because of the proximity of the dots. Because the proximity is because we're keeping things close. You're seeing, probably on the left, you're seeing columns, at least I do. And on the right, because we have larger spacing between the dots and shorter spacing as going horizontally, you're probably seeing rows. So the shorter spacing is creating that grouping effect in your brain. Kind of neat. So second one, so similarity. So our brains also will group objects by size, by color, by shape. And so again, here, I see rows because I'm seeing two lines of blue. And if you might be colorblind, but if you're seeing that, your brain is looking at that and it's grouping those. And so so on these pages, if you actually look at the visual and then listen to me or read the text, you'll see what's happening. But our brains are then taking things and saying, okay, these are all blue. So that's obviously one thing. So I'm going to see a row. Interesting. The next is enclosure. So our brains will also group objects that where we see things as physically enclosed. So if you look at that visual, there's a gray box that was drawn around some dots. And if you just looked at that quickly, I would have interpreted, oh, those, there's what, 8 dots in that box, they must be part of a group. Our brains will just do that naturally. Our brains will also fill in the gaps. This is pretty interesting. This is actually what our brains are really good at, because this is like how peripheral vision works and how in general things work. But if you're building analytics, this is something you have to be careful. So a lot of times, you could have dots on a chart, like a scatter plot, and some people will mentally, they'll start thinking it's, should be a line graph, and maybe that's not what you intend. But our brains will try to fill things in. And so a lot of people, when they look at this, see a circle, even though technically it's like 8 different curved lines. But in general, our brain fills that in and says, oh, that's a circle, if you just at first glance. And remember, that's system 1. That's what we want. We want quick, rapid kind of engagement, and we want to leverage these Gestalt principles when we're setting up our analytics. And we want to know that these are things that people's brains are going to do when they look at an analytics. So these are things that they don't even have to work at. It's stuff that will happen. So if you group something, use color to separate things, use proximity, how close something would be to do stuff, you can create these effects that people will very quickly interpret. So this one's kind of interesting. So continuity. So take a look at that object below. And so our brains also tend to fill in gaps. So if I pull away the bottom box, what would you expect to see? And most people would say those were actually 2 different objects. And so they would say, I expect to see number 2. Where maybe what was actually there was number 3. So you can leverage continuity because people are able to see things. And even though there's, you might have multiple objects that you're grouping together, people can separate those in their mind. It's pretty interesting. And the last, and this is an example, I used this one before, but it's more about connections. Our brains are going to group things that are physically connected. So if I connect the dots from the left, we start to see things that are connected. We assume order. We assume you follow the line, right? We're taught to do that as kids, right? When you're coloring, or those connect the dots books or things like that. But that's the idea. So your brain, when it sees this, interprets this, and sees connection no matter what. So that kind of wraps it up. So hopefully you learned a little bit. This is meant to be a short kind of 20-minute lecture, just kind of get you thinking. I am going to give you some reading ideas and some things you can do. But here's some interesting stuff. So that the decision tree we looked at, I don't know who picked it up, but so one thing to keep in mind, and this was something that I didn't pick up. I was reading a book by a guy named Stephen Few. And it was about creating good visualizations for people that may be visually impaired. And so an example of that might be if someone's colorblind. So red-green colorblindness is the most common type of colorblindness. So that decision tree that I showed, where the left was green and the right was red, when you're picking visualizations, is actually not a very good one. And I didn't pick up on that until I was putting my notes together. And it is something that I keep in mind when I'm creating visualizations these days. I try to stay away from red and green, but it's really hard because a lot of times status reports and things like that, people want to use red for bad and green for good. And I've worked with people that can't see that. And so a lot of times, if you're going to do something like that, you would also use a shape as well, right? So remember, we can do color, shape, and motion. So in the event that you can't use, if you use a color, a lot of times people will say, well, maybe you should also use a shape, or they should have put a Y and an N in that decision tree. So it's not a good one, but I like it for an example to see if you picked up on it. So keep that in mind. I'll show you a book here in a second that if you're really interested in that, there's a lot more about visual creating analytics and dashboards for the visually impaired and things that you might deal with and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. And the next thing that I like to talk to people about as a bonus thought, and I didn't really hit it in here, so I thought it was appropriate to put in our bonus thoughts, was that graph. So there's a book called, and I don't have this in here, but there's a book called How to Lie with Statistics. And what it talks about is making sure you're paying a lot of attention to statistics and information you're given, because people can manipulate what you're seeing. So, and we can do that by things like changing the scale on a graph. So if you look at the left, that graph goes from 0 to 10. You look at the right, it started at 1.8 and it only goes up to 3. Those are pretty different looking graphs, but that is the exact same information. You can use that information for good or evil. You pick. But it's pretty powerful to know that you can change scale, and there's things that you can do that will affect perception of what that is. So if I look at the right, I'm like, whoa, sugar has gone way up in price, but maybe that's not that material. It's 30 cents or something like that, not even. Where on the left, you might say, no, sugar's been pretty stable, right? So you have two different interpretations based on that scale. So scale, and the way you can actually interpret or change the visual effect based on scale becomes pretty important. So keep that in mind. So lastly, I've got some recommended reading. So a lot of what you saw in this presentation is from one of my favorite books on this, which is Storytelling with Data. If you're just looking for a single book and you need something, Storytelling with Data, you'll find a lot of what I talked about was in there. It's in other books too that I've pulled from, but at some point I came across this book and I found that it handled about 80% of the stuff that I was wanting information on. The second book I'd recommend is Now You See It by Stephen Few. So that's where I learned about visual impairness. How do you actually and he's got some newer books; those might be better. But the one I've read and recommend is Now You See It. But he has a lot of information in there on really how to think about visualization and what you're trying to accomplish, and way more caveats than I've put in here. And the third is a book called Data Science for Business, which isn't going to get so much into visualization, but it does get into data analytic thinking. And it's really, if you're trying to take a step towards being a data scientist, it's a really good primer on how a lot of that works and the processes associated with it. And I think it even goes into a lot of examples of different types of analytics and things that you can build. So hopefully that was helpful. I've had a lot of fun with this. This is really exciting. If you have questions, you can contact me. If you go back through the contact letter or through the presentation, you'll find that. But hopefully that was helpful, and I hope that everyone has a really good day. Thank you.